Yay!
Thank you. Shall I turn this slightly more towards me?
Good, yeah. Maybe just check to see if everyone can hear me okay.
Is it being recorded?
No, I don't think I'm the host.
Oh, is
I
it?
think it is. I think it is now.
It's being recorded.
Okay. So yeah, I decided to do Kisa Gotami's story. She is an interesting woman from a place called Savasti in ancient India 2,500 years ago. It's actually the same time as the Buddha was around there. He was a lot of the stories you hear about the Buddha actually came from that period. So, and from that area. So there will be lots of characters in that town who living with Kisa Gotami as well. So there's a whole host of individuals and people who you would have heard about in other Buddhist stories. So I want to try and fill our way in, because I want to try and fill our way into what this place was back then. Because often we just hear these suttas and we just hear this list of things which happened. And you don't really think about what the environment was like. You know, you just have this vague idea that it was a long time ago. Savasti is in Uttar Pradesh, which is the northern region of India, right up by Nepal. It has the Rapti River, which runs near it, so it would have been fed by that. When we've had rice fields, lots of agriculture around it. It was so really would have been a lot of food produced, and it would have and it was on 3 major trade routes. So it was on the Silk Road. There would have been another road probably going up into Nepal and feeding Tibet, and another one going down into southern India. So it was an important town. And there would have been people coming all the way from Europe, all the way from China. This have been very multicultural. So this is like the backdrop of where this story is taking place. It would have been surrounded by forests, and there would have been tigers in those forests, and wild elephants would have been coming into the paddy fields and annoying the farmers. And warthogs and exotic birds. It would have rained a lot for 3 months of the year, but the rest of the year it would have been very fertile and green. And this is just putting some bones in this place. And so Kisa was born into a very poor family. I don't know that poor would have been quite the same as it is now. Imagine that maybe you see poor people in India now, but it's like there's no nature left. There's no, they're living in towns, which would mean, there's nothing there. It's just dirt and terrible buildings and bad sewage. But maybe it wasn't quite the same as that. I don't know that though. And some of these things I'm sort of imagining my way into. And I want us to try and learn that imaginative faculty about how we put bones on things in a sensitive manner. But I don't want you to think that she was rolling around in dirt. She may not have been. May have been quite, may have been reasonably humane, like there would have been a lot of food in the place because of the farming community. She was a very lean child. She got teased remorselessly by other children about that. And she was so much so that she was given the nickname Kisa, which means skinny in I think it would have been Pali back then, and so she was called Kisa Gotami. That's how we know her. That's how her name survived through all these years. So in fact, she was teased. Maybe it was easy to tease her because she was very sensitive. Maybe she was slightly outside of, a little bit of an outsider. Some of us might relate to that. She was from this poor background, but maybe she was actually quite charismatic and an intelligent woman. because when she became old enough to marry, so she could have possibly been quite a beauty as well when she became a woman, because she ended up marrying a very rich man, one of the richest men in Savasti. But once she was in this family, she was however taunted a lot by his relatives, giving her much of a hard time. Had her poor background, being skinny, but also because she couldn't have a baby, so she wasn't able to have a child. So that was also so she was finding it hard. Marriage wasn't as wonderful as perhaps she might have thought. One day, though, happily, she had a little boy, and now her life changed. She loved, she had this lovely child. She had the heir to the family. So everybody started rallying around her and started showing her respect. As did the wider society. Everybody was just nicer to her. Maybe she put on a little bit more weight. She was just much more happy, joyful. And she loved the baby. She was very. Yeah. The boy grew and began to walk and talk and then run. But then one day he died. Became ill and died. It was obviously back in those times. It was quite common for families for children to die quite young. And Kisa was devastated at this loss of her beautiful child, but also not just a beautiful child, but all the connections woven into his existence, all this newfound connection with the family and the wider society and the respect that had been shown. All this had just disappeared. The extended family at best were sympathetic. You can imagine. I don't know, because as I said, these are very not that many. This isn't very well described, this original story, but you can imagine that maybe the family may have gone back to how it was before, being unsympathetic, or worse, blaming her for it. She was completely lost by this, and almost went mad from grief, and then went into denial, even refusing to acknowledge the death of the child. She refused to take it to the charnel grounds, or the cremation grounds, as we might call them. And she bundled up the child, and took him into the streets of Savasti. Where it was described, it's quite a prosperous, busy city. There have been all kinds of characters, there have been Brahmins and shaman and doctors and people from all around the world would have been travelling through there. It would have been quite a sight, with lots of stalls and maybe elephants and camels, maybe horses, ox and carts. There would have been a lot of colour there. And buildings, quite important buildings, and somewhat maybe more dishevelled buildings. It would have been quite exotic. And in there, back then you would have seen Kisa Gotami standing there with a child, knocking on doors and asking different people about if they had any medicine for this child. And some people might not have been understood what she's saying, being foreign, so they would have just gone by. Other people would have maybe stopped and asked to see the child, and said, "Oh, can I see your child?" She would have shown them, and they would have been shocked that that she was holding this dead child in her arms. And other people may have even regaled her about it. So, but she seemed to be almost oblivious. Didn't really understand. Eventually, she meets a kind man, and he tells her to go and see the Buddha, who is actually living nearby in Jinavajra Vihara, which is probably about 4K away, so very close. interestingly, he would have been going probably into Savatthi every day to get his food. So he would have been in this backdrop as well, as all this was going on, and his disciples. So it's a sort of rich, interesting area. So weeping, she took the child, where she laid the child at his feet, and begged him for a cure. And the Buddha listened with deep understanding and kindness, and said that if she went to the town and got some mustard seeds from a household where no one had experienced death, then he would be able to make a cure from those seeds. I think that we've got to sort of imagine into the Buddha as well. I mean, it sounds like, oh, she just went up to the Buddha and he said these things to her, but he would have really met her. She would have been in the presence of this man who would have seen, he was the ultimate compassionate human being. And I'm talking about us, feeling our way into times back then, but she would have met him, and he would have seen her. He would have understood her problems. He would have seen this child who may have started to decompose slightly. He would have seen straight into her suffering, and understood the connections and problems which she was encountering with her refusal to come to terms with the death of her child. So this would have been a powerful experience for her. So, armed with the great compassion that the Buddha had shown her, she and the dead child set off back to Savatthi, filled with optimism and belief that her child could be cured. Mustard seeds were the cheapest and most common spices back then, so surely the journey's quest would be successful. As she went from one house to the next, though, she heard talk of loss, of one loss after another. At first she pushed on, writing each tale off as not important, her bravado carrying her to the next house. But slowly the stories washed over her, and she began to realise the truth. People everywhere had lost mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands and wives, and of course children, adult children and babies. And the loss and suffering it brought was everywhere. Personal suffering, a particle in the river of tears throughout the universe. Her isolated grief caused by her attachment to things which were no more. Opened her up to compassion for the situation, for herself and the other people whose stories she had heard and whose grief she had felt. She had a great loving insight into the nature of what is the reality of a loving kindness universe. So now Kisa felt able to return to the Buddha. So now Kisa felt able to say goodbye to her beloved child, and went to the charnel grounds and said goodbye to him. She then returned to the Buddha and became a follower, eventually becoming enlightened. So I wanted also to relate this to us and how we perceive, how we find it hard to let go of things, not just in death, but other situations like partners might leave us, or we might just lose a job, or we can't get what we want, or some things. So I was going to just look into that now. The Buddha doesn't just give advice from his experience, from how he sees things. He would see that wouldn't be any use. Instead, his compassion is transmitted through sending her on a journey of discovery, so she can see the truth for herself from her own perspective. He would not have seen her as mad, but as confused as most people are, unable to let go of what they have come by, what has arisen and now has gone, and unable to deal with what is before and now. The Buddha is encouraging Kisa to explore the reality of her situation. He really listens to her with his heart and enters into her world, into her worldview, and takes it seriously. So helps her to see how her reality fits within the greater reality. And this leads to Kisa Gotami's transformation. Seeing, feeling, understanding the conditions which have led to this present moment, which are unique to every individual, doing the experiencing of the Buddha's genius in this story. All our different problems and sufferings are all completely unique as well, to do with our conditions and all the things which have happened to us and throughout time, because we have our parents, intergenerational stories which feed into our lives, our countries, our sex, all kinds of things. And so we all experience things in a unique way. I mean, on a personal note, my mother died before Christmas, and that happens to all of us, or potentially that will happen. So that's not unique to me, but there's things which, there's always different permutations of how this can happen. My age, at the age at which I experienced it, I have to go all the way back to England to deal with it and be with her on her deathbed. The fact that I saw her, I said goodbye to her for 6 days. Some people don't get to do that. Very privileged that I could do that. With my Buddhist practice, I expected things to be a lot easier than they were, because I thought I understood about impermanence and suffering and how that's part of life, but we all meet it differently, and this is an existential thing. I'm 58, so I can see that my mother, who is 26 years older than me, I can feel this end point. And so, I realise that I have to be prepared. But I also see that it's important for me to meet the grief well, because in doing so, I can help other people. I always feel it's very important. If somebody else, somebody's lost somebody, to say to them, "I'm so sorry to hear this," because it means a lot to them, because you're seeing into the situation like Buddha saw the Kisa Gotami. So it really helps for people to acknowledge your loss. So this is so I think I'm very lucky that I've found the Dharma, because I have had lots of opportunities to meet my grief. There's sort of ceremonies and stuff like that. Probably more powerful than the funeral was a ceremony called the Vajrasattva Puja, where we recite this mantra 21 times, and you can say goodbye to relatives during it. And I have the ability to draw, so I did a number of drawings of my mother. And the relations, I did one of her, she was always smiling, so the drawing of her smiling, one of her more of an archetypal figure with her child in his arms, and in the universe, and you have a flow of connections, and one of her actually dead. And it was a very powerful thing. I mean, I cried, certainly cried all the way through it. And it was just a very beautiful thing. I mean, I was so lucky to be able to have these opportunities to meet the grief and to sense the lives which have come and gone, and those precious moments in life. Like, our images of my mother of, putting food down on the table for us, or situations where I would, you know, as a little child, would hold her hand and like being, you know, having cuddles from her and stuff. And the tragedy of us having to age and become sick and die. So yeah. So I'd just like to play a song which helped me more with my father's death, which I had also, I've been a Buddhist for about 6 years when he died. But it was it's by Allen Ginsberg, who's a famous beat poet and a Dharma practitioner. Hopefully this works for this time. About him going to meet his father to die.
Father death, I'm flying home. Hey, poor man, you're all alone. Hey, old daddy, I know where I'm going. Father death, don't cry anymore. Mama's there underneath the floor. Brother death, please mind the sore. Old auntie death, don't hide your bones. Old uncle death, I hear your groans. Oh sister death, how sweet your moans. Oh children death, go breathe your breaths. Sobbing breasts, so ease your deaths. Pain is gone, tears take the rest. Genius death, your art is done. Lover death, your body's gone. Father death, I'm coming home. Guru death, your words are true. Teacher death, I do thank you for inspiring me to sing this blues. Buddha death, I wake with you. Dharma death, your mind is new. Sangha death, we'll work it through. Suffering is what was born. Ignorance made me forlorn. Tearful truth I cannot scorn. Father breath, once more farewell. Birth you gave was no thing ill. My heart is still, as time will tell. Guru death, your words are true. Teacher death, I do thank you for inspiring me to sing this blues. Father breath, once more farewell. Birth you gave was no thing ill. My heart is still, as time will tell.
The living are few, the dead are many. Love. Love. The living are few, the dead are many. Love conquers all.